A warm welcome to the program this evening. I'm Joke Rogers in Lagos. Here's what's coming up on the world today. Dagestan airport in Russia shatters pro-Palestinian protest turns violent. Israel says its 2-week Gaza evacuation call is now urgent. Last Spanish police seized 20 kilos of cocaine hidden in a truck carrying scrap metal. Thanks for staying with us on the program. We understand Israeli armored vehicles have been seen in Gaza's main north-south road close to Gaza City as Israel continues expanding its ground offensive. According to the Israeli military, there would be no comment on the location of their forces, but earlier troops said they had killed dozens of terrorists during overnight clashes. Israel has been bombing Gaza since the Hamas attack on October 7th. At least 1,400 people have been killed in Israel, with 239 kidnapped as hostages. But authorities in Gaza say more than 8,000 people have been killed since Israel's retaliatory attack. Russia has blamed Ukraine for the incident that happened at an airport in the region of Dagestan earlier today. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova says storming the Machkala airport in the Dagestan region was the result of provocation orchestrated from outside of Russia, with the Ukraine playing a direct key role. A group of pro-Palestinian protesters poured onto the runway at Russia's airport in Dagestan, reportedly looking for Jews. All aircraft bound for Makachala were diverted to other airports. Media reports from the area said demonstrators denouncing Israeli actions in Gaza had gathered at the facility. Large groups of protesters were seen entering air terminals and then storming various rooms inside of the airport. Israel has urged Russian authorities to protect Israelis and Jews in their jurisdictions following reports of potential reprisals by pro-Palestinian protesters in Dagestan. A statement by the Foreign Ministry in Jerusalem said that the Israeli ambassador in Moscow was working with Russian authorities as Israel views attempts to harm Israeli citizens and Jews anywhere as grave. Well, after the incident this morning, the head of Dagestan Republic in southern Russia, Sergei Melikov, inspected the airport in Makachakla. The pro-Palestinian protesters had caused damage in the customs zones, passport control area, and other premises. The rampage, as we have already reported, happened when a flight from Israel had landed in Makachakla. Media reports say that the area say that demonstrators denouncing Israeli actions in Gaza had gathered at the facility. In the meantime, thousands of Palestinians have been taking shelter at Al-Shifa Hospital, Gaza's biggest medical center, that has recently received evacuation orders from Israel, but civilians sheltering there say they have nowhere else to go and they are not planning on leaving just yet. They roam the area surrounding the hospital with tents housing families from various parts of Gaza. Food and clothes stalls have been set up around the hospital. The Israeli military accused the Islamist movement Hamas on Friday of using the main hospital in Gaza as shields for its tunnels and operational centers. Hamas official Azat el-Rashik, a member of the movement's political bureau, said on Telegram there is no basis in the truth to what was reported by the enemy army spokesperson, accusing Israel of spreading lies as a prelude to committing a new massacre against our people. Health officials say the hospital now houses nearly 50,000 displaced Palestinians. Staying with the hospitals, it has not been an easy ride for volunteers helping medical personnel there. One of them, Loe Al-Astal, says that since the beginning of the war, he has been volunteering in the first aid and emergency unit to help paramedics amid the large number of injuries caused by the Israeli airstrikes. Unemployed but holder of a paramedic science diploma, 33-year-old Astel decided to join the medical teams to work side by side with them. He has not gone home since then. He says he showers and sleeps at the hospital, even eats there. He says that he has colleagues who have been martyred since the first day of the war, but his goal, along with others, is humanitarian service in order to save people and offer the least they can. And over the weekend, thousands of people broke into 8 depots in a worrying sign of civil disorder starting to break. UNRWA says people took flour and other basic supplies after storming several warehouses and distribution centers in the center and south of the territory on Saturday.
Thousands of Gaza residents broke into warehouses and distribution centers of the United Nations Palestinian Refugee Agency, grabbing flours and basic survival items. Aid supplies have been choked since Israel began the bombarding of the densely populated Palestinian enclave in response to a deadly attack by its ruling militant group Hamas on October the 7th. The situation in Gaza has prompted the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres to once again call for a ceasefire.
And I reiterate my appeal for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, the unconditional release of all hostages, and the delivery of a sustained humanitarian relief at a scale that meets the needs of the people of Gaza.
In the meantime, loud explosions ripped the Gaza skyline on Sunday, interspersed with the sound of gun battles as Israel expanded ground operations in the enclave. The Israeli military has heightened the blockade and bombarded Gaza for 3 weeks since Hamas militants killed at least 1,400 people and took more than 200 hostage in early October. However, there are heightened concerns over the safety of thousands of Palestinians inside Al-Quds hospital in Gaza after receiving a warning from the Israeli army to evacuate. Some 14,000 people have been displaced and are currently residing in the hospital. In addition to intensive care unit patients and 800 injured receiving treatment in the emergency department. The Palestinian Red Crescent says it has received warning from Israeli authorities to immediately evacuate Al-Quds hospital as raids conducted on Sunday are taking place just 50 meters from the facility.
Meanwhile, this morning, multiple explosions rocked Gaza as Israel continued to expand its ground operations in the Strip. Israel's military said it struck over 600 militant targets over the past few days in the coastal enclave where Palestinian civilians are in dire need of fuel, food, and clean water as the conflict entered into its 4th week. Medical officials in Gaza said at least 20 Palestinians had been killed and dozens wounded overnight as Israeli ground forces pushed into Gaza from multiple directions. Residents say they could hear shooting and explosions all night Sunday, while Islamist groups Hamas and Islamic Jihad said their members were engaged in fighting with Israeli forces in Gaza, as well as West Bank city of Jenin. And we hear the Israeli military calling on Palestinians in the Gaza Strip to evacuate southwards away from the main focus of the war against Hamas was now urgent. Chief spokesperson Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari says over the last 2 weeks, we have been calling on residents of the northern Gaza Strip and Gaza City to relocate southward temporarily, relocate for their personal safety as well. He adds that the number of people confirmed held hostage in Gaza since Hamas' October 7 cross-border onslaught in southern Israel had risen to 239. Let's bring in VOA's Ricky Rosen, who is on the move in Israel because of the fighting. Ricky, glad to have you join us on the program today. A quick one, is the situation any better where you are?
Actually, today was quiet, but for the last few days, there were a lot of rocket air raid sirens targeting the Tel Aviv area, and several people were injured. from shrapnel and smoke inhalation from fires, and buildings were damaged.
Well, Israel says it has begun the ground offensive in Gaza and is asking people to evacuate. A lot of people don't know where to go. They say they don't know where they need to be. Is there a humanitarian corridor to assist with the move?
We hear it's hard to get news out of Gaza, but the evacuation of Gazans from northern Gaza, where the Israeli army is going in, is not organized at all. It's a free-for-all. And in fact, many report that Hamas has set up roadblocks to prevent evacuation because they don't want to have the whole population move to the south and give that advantage to the Israeli army.
So what's happening in Israel apart from the Iron Dome preventing as many rocket strikes from Gaza from getting through?
Well, people are very focused on the ground invasion, the safety of soldiers. With 360,000 reservists, almost everyone has somebody that they know serving in the army. People are also concerned about the volatile northern border with Lebanon and Hezbollah rockets coming from there. And people are worried about the safety and the fate of the hostages now that the ground invasion has started. And they're not sure that this will help facilitate the return of the hostages.
And how is the Israeli government responding to calls by the international community for a ceasefire, especially for humanitarian purposes?
I think the Israeli government is pretty clear and refuses to heed the calls for a humanitarian ceasefire as long as the 233 plus hostages are being held, which Israelis consider a huge humanitarian crisis in itself.
And Israel's attacks have gone beyond Gaza to Lebanon, Syria, and even Egypt. How is the government justifying these attacks?
I'm not sure that the government feels like, I don't think that they have attacked actually Egypt. There was a missile in Egypt that they thought came from Yemen. But the attacks in Syria and in Lebanon are considered to be attacks against Iranian proxies, which the government and the military consider to be behind the Hamas attacks from 3 weeks ago.
And is there any such thing as normal life in Israel as we speak, Ricky?
I think people have given up on the idea of normal life for a long time to come. Many businesses are shut because the workers have been called up to the army. Schools are shut. Produce from farms in the south isn't coming into the markets. And people are just going around with a sense of kind of trauma and dread for the future. And we've been assured by the government that this will probably last for a long time.
Right. And I can't imagine life, as a journalist, covering a war situation must be hard. How safe is it and how difficult is it being on the move, knowing that, there's a ground, Israel is doing a lot to attack Gaza, and there's a lot going on militarily?
I wouldn't like to be a journalist working in Gaza because you have no idea where the bombs are going to fall. Here, most journalists have been safe. People have gotten into difficult situations when there are rockets falling while they're reporting. But in general, it's just a sense of panic because the story just keeps on developing and moving forward, and it's hard to keep up.
Right. Ricky, thank you for your time today. for talking to us about the situation, and please do stay safe.
Thank you.
Let's move on. British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says his country is working on a humanitarian pause to get aid to the people of Gaza. He was making the comments at the UK ambassador's residence in Abu Dhabi. Mr. Cleverly is scheduled to meet UAE Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan on Monday to discuss the conflict and various means that could be employed to resolve it.
In direct response to the emerging humanitarian situation in Gaza, the British Prime Minister announced more than doubling of our aid to the Palestinian people in Gaza. But at the moment, that aid is predominantly stuck in Egypt. We're working extensively with the Egyptians, with the Israelis and others to try and have a humanitarian pause, temporary pause, so that we can get that humanitarian aid to the people that need it. It's trickling through, but we need a significant increase in the volume. It's part of the reason that I'll be meeting with Sheikh Abdullah later on today, and why I will continue to speak with the political leadership in the region to try and get that aid to the people that need it. What we've seen on the 7th of October is a series of mass atrocities, the like of which I don't think any of us have seen before in our adult lives. So it is, of course, right that Israel takes action to defend itself and to protect its citizens. How they do that is, of course, for their military planners. But we have said throughout this that we expect them to act with professionalism, with restraint, to abide by international law, and we've had reassurances from Israel that they will do that. But ultimately, we all have an interest to see a resolution in the situation between the Israelis and the Palestinians so that both Israelis and Palestinians can live in peace and security. Well, of course, there is a risk that this escalates and spreads across the region. It is in nobody's interest for that to happen. I've spoken extensively with the political leadership in all the countries around Israel's border, including with Lebanon, and we are working to try and make sure that this does not become a regional conflict.
And coming up after the break, ICC prosecutor Karim Khan calls on Israel to ensure civilians get food and medicine in Gaza. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the program as we continue our coverage of the Israel-Palestinian violence. We head to Jerusalem now, where a suspect stabbed an Israeli police officer near the light rail. The suspect was shot at by other Israeli forces who arrived on scene, and the wounded Israeli police officer was taken to the hospital, according to Israeli media. Footage from the area showed Israeli forces on high alert as many residents of the area, both Palestinians and Israelis, started clashing, yelling at each other, while Israeli police at the scene split them up. Violence in the territory has surged since Israel began bombarding the Gaza Strip after the Islamist group Hamas' devastating October 7 attack that killed at least 1,400 Israelis. Impeding relief supplies to Gaza's population may constitute a crime under the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction. So says the court's top prosecutor, Karim Khan, at a news conference in Egypt on Sunday. Mr. Khan also said Israel must make indiscernible efforts without further delay to make sure civilians receive basic food and medicine. Aid supplies to Gaza have been minimal since Israel began bombarding the densely populated Palestinian enclave in response to a deadly attack by its ruling militant group Hamas on October 7. Israeli officials have said that food, water and medicines have been coming in through the Egyptian border and that it is expected the quantities to rise.
For the immediate release of all hostages taken from Israel and for their safe return to their families. And I want to underline clearly to Israel that there must be discernible efforts without further delay to make sure civilians receive basic food, medicine, anesthetics, morphine. We hear reports of operations taking place without these basic medicines, as if we're in the Middle Ages, and too many are dying and too many are being injured. And it's alarming to see the bodies of young children that could be our own children being dragged, baked in dust, still silent, motionless because they're dead. In this regard, I have to say that Israel has clear obligations in relation to its war with Hamas. Not just moral obligations, but legal obligations to comply with the laws of armed conflict.
And we hear once more from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who has called for an immediate release of hostages taken by Hamas and for a humanitarian ceasefire. He was drawing attention to the issue as aid supplies are drying up in Gaza due to the Israeli blockade. Mr. Guterres says he will continue to insist on the immediate and unconditional release of hostages held in Gaza.
And I will continue to insist on the immediate and unconditional release of all the hostages in Gaza. And I repeat my utter condemnation of the appalling attacks perpetrated by Hamas. There is no justification ever for the killing, injuring, and abduction of civilians. The situation in Gaza is growing more desperate by the hour. I regret that instead of a critically needed humanitarian pause supported by the international community, Israel has intensified its military operations. The number of civilians who have been killed and injured is totally unacceptable. All parties must respect their obligations under international humanitarian law. That law emerged from the tragedy and awful experiences of war. I've always been consistent in my call for strict compliance of the well-established principles and the rule of international humanitarian law. The protection of civilians is paramount. The laws of war establish clear rules to protect human life and respect humanitarian concerns. Those laws cannot be contorted for the sake of expedience. The world is witnessing a humanitarian catastrophe taking place before our eyes. More than 2 million people with nowhere safe to go are being denied the essentials for life: food, water, shelter, and medical care, while being subjected to relentless bombardments. I urge all those with responsibility to step back from the brink. And I reiterate my appeal for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, the unconditional release of all hostages, and the delivery of a sustained humanitarian relief at a scale that meets the needs of the people of Gaza. We must join forces to end this nightmare for the people of Gaza, Israel, and all those affected around the world, including here in Nepal.
And more on the humanitarian situation in Gaza as the Director of Communications at the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, Juliet Tuma, explained what happened over the weekend. She speaks about the Palestinians breaking into UN warehouses and grabbing at supplies, indicating they had reached breaking point at that point.
So we had thousands of people coming into one of the warehouses and food distribution centers in both Khan Yunis and Deir al-Balah, so the middle areas, and Khan Yunis further south. And this happened yesterday during the day, and wheat flour was taken and other supplies like hygiene kits and cleaning material from our warehouses. This is an indication that people in Gaza have reached a breaking point. The levels of desperation, their frustration, their fear, their concern, they have been living under tight siege for more than 3 weeks. Bombardments continue. They have lost so much. They are grieving themselves. They have become displaced. So the levels of frustration and despair are really very high, and people are hitting rock bottom when it comes to their patience, their ability to take more. Yesterday there was no convoy. To date, Sunday the 29th of October, there has not been any supplies coming in. It's almost 7 p.m. local time. We have not gotten any supplies today. This could change, of course, during the coming hours. In general, those supplies are very, very little, and they don't correspond to the huge needs on the ground. We are asking for a standard and regular flow of supplies, of humanitarian supplies, including fuel, an increase in the number of trucks on these convoys, better system to bring in supplies and assistance to people in need in the Gaza Strip, and we're also calling for a ceasefire.
To other protests related to the current Israel-Hamas war, demonstrators gathered outside the Qatari embassy in London on Sunday to show solidarity with Israel and call for the release of hostages held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. A train of demonstrators lined up in front of the embassy, waving Israeli flags and holding flyers with names and pictures of the hostages taken by Hamas on the attack on Israel on October 7. Qatar-mediated negotiations between Israel and Hamas aimed to de-escalate fighting in Gaza and are taking place at a much slower pace than before. Israel intensified its assaults on the enclave on Friday. A source briefed on the negotiations told Reuters, speaking on the condition of anonymity due to the sensitivity of the ongoing negotiations.
We are worried, but we know the ground offensive has to take place. We have to destroy. Hamas has to go in order for the Palestinians to have a decent life and for Israel to be able to live securely and without this ever happening again.
They need to do everything that they can, twist their Hamas's arm to make sure that they do something a little bit right, fixing all the wrongs that they have done, these Qataris, by financing Hamas and bring our people home. This is why I'm here.
Meanwhile, hundreds of Canadian protesters also took to the streets of Toronto on Sunday to demand a ceasefire in Gaza as the conflict between Israel and Hamas continues to escalate. Protesters gathered outside the U.S. Consulate General for the rally, which was organized by the Palestinian Youth Movement in Toronto. Yara Shufani, a member of the group, said they are also calling for an end to both U.S. and Canadian funding and support of Israel's genocide. Members of the Independent Jewish Voices joined the protest and criticized what they said was a genocide being done in their name. International outcry has been mounting over the past days, with large-scale demonstrations in cities like London and New York calling for a humanitarian pause to allow aid inside Gaza.
To demand an immediate ceasefire, to demand an end to both U.S. and Canadian funding and support of Israel's genocide, and also to call on Canadian people to join us, to take a stand, to lift Israel's 17-year-long siege on Gaza, whereby Israel controls Gaza's air, land, and water.
We're here as Jews to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people, demanding an immediate ceasefire, demanding Israel let in humanitarian aid. They've only let in a shameful 80 trucks, end the genocide, end the occupation, and Canadian complicity in all this. Secondly, to speak to all my fellow Jews, I think we are all, a lot of us are descendants of the Holocaust, and we all need to look deep down inside because this is straight up genocide and it's being done in our names.
The situation was already horrific, but with this, it's like, I feel like it is PTSD that just never ends. Like there is no post to this. It's the sixth time. In 2014, we lost 7 members of our family in just one go. So I know that there are members of my family who have, been murdered, but the exact number I can't tell you, and I don't think we will know until, a lot of time has passed.
As a Jew, I am absolutely heartbroken. It is devastating to see that this is being done in our name. It's never anti-Semitic to criticize Israel or to criticize war crimes. We need to stop this. We need our government to demand a ceasefire. We need the ceasefire now. We've already lost thousands and thousands of innocent civilians, and this is just, it's horrible collective punishment.
Away from the Israel-Hamas conflict, as we take a quick look at what's happening in Russia, an 85-year-old woman has been killed in heavy overnight shelling of the frontline city of Kherson, according to Ukrainian authorities. Roman Rochko, head of the city's military administration, said on Telegram in the central district of the city, high-rise buildings and one of the social institutions were hit. He said the attack caused a fire and injured a resident, posting a video showing scorched rooms with collapsed walls and ceilings, shattered windows, and piles of construction waste. Elsewhere now, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the European Union plans to help the countries of the Western Balkans to pursue reforms needed for integration with a wealthy bloc with €6 billion investment. According to her, North Macedonia, Albania, Kosovo, Serbia, Montenegro, and Bosnia and Herzegovina all need to seize the window of opportunity for the enlargement of EU and work to align their standards to those in the bloc. Ms. von der Leyen said the EU's new growth plan for the region would include the opening of its common market to the Western Balkan countries in areas such as free movement of goods and services, transport, and energy. It also urged the countries to open a common regional market and pursue with necessary reforms. Having been promised EU membership years ago, the accession process across the region has slowed to a crawl, mainly due to reluctance among the bloc's 27 members and a lack of reform throughout the region.
What we aim to do together is to double your economy within the next decade. And this is the reason why we present the new growth plan for the Western Balkans. You have described it. Indeed, there are more or less 4 important steps. The first is we give your companies access to key parts of the European single market. We basically open the doors to the European single market in 7 different important sectors. The second pillar is we ask you also to open your common regional market in the Western Balkans for your neighbors and to complete this common regional market, because the potential of the common regional market in the Western Balkans is huge. The common regional market could, if we complete it, increase the GDP of the Western Balkans by 10%. So it's a huge opportunity to move forward.
Staying in Europe, Spanish police say they have seized 720 kilos of cocaine hidden among scrap metal in a truck from Costa Rica in the southern Spanish city of Malaga. Footage showed officers dismantling the truck and finding blue packs inside an aluminum sarcophagus after opening it with drills and tweezers. Police said 8 people were arrested across the Andalusia region. And still ahead, our foreign affairs correspondent who recently visited Saudi Arabia reveals antique treasures in Riyadh's Souk Al-Zal. Details in a moment. Welcome back. Here in Africa, some Kenyan communities, including the Nandi, Kipsigis, and Pokot, are demanding for apologies and financial compensation from the UK government for historical injustices committed against them during colonial rule, as the country looks set to welcome King Charles for an official state visit. The communities are also calling on the UK to return their traditional artifacts and ancestral lands, which were grabbed by the colonial regime and are still being held by British entities. More than 100 years after his death, Koitali Samoei, a colonial-era chief of Nandi people who fought against the British colonial rule, was finally honored and commemorated in a mausoleum in Nandi Hills of Kenya. Leading his tribesmen against Britain in the early 20th century in Western Kenya for more than a decade, Samoei is regarded as a hero and legendary leader among the Kalenjin community. According to historical records, Samoei was murdered in 1905 by a British intelligence officer. Ahead of the UK King Charles III's official visit to the East African country, Samoa's great-grandson and historian Kipchoge Arap Chomu is hoping to address the long-standing issue regarding the late chief's remains and seek an apology from the British government.
We got the report from those elders who were there that the next day they found Kochales Samoa's body headless, and they buried that headless body. And that's why one of the demands, on one of the appeals we are making to the British government is that they please return that head. They return that skull, whatever there is. We believe among the skulls which are found in British museums is Kochales Samoa's skull. In fact, we don't request. In fact, we have to demand a public apology from the government of British because of the atrocities they meted on our people. The first one is an apology. After the apologies, we also expect a reparation.
And to Asia, the death toll from a train crash in India has risen to 14, with at least 50 injured, with investigators suspecting human error was the cause of the crash in the southeastern state of Andhra Pradesh. The accident occurred when a passenger train stopped on Sunday because of a break in an overhead cable, and the express service rammed into it from the rear, derailing two carriages of the stationary train. The Railway Ministry said a preliminary investigation found that human error led to the overshooting of signal by the train. The accident came months after India's state-run railway system suffered its worst crash in 2 decades, when 292 people were killed in Indian Railways. The fourth largest rail network in the world is undergoing a $30 billion transformation, with new trains and modern stations in the pipeline. Staying in India, where police are also investigating a series of explosions which killed 3 people at a Jehovah's Witnesses meeting in the southern state of Kerala. More than 50 others were injured in the blasts on Sunday at an event held by the Christian-based religious movement near the port city of Kochi. A man was detained after he posted a video claiming responsibility for the attacks and surrendered to police. Police said that they were still trying to verify his confession. The incident took place during a prayer session organized by Jehovah's Witnesses in the town of Kalamassery. That's about 10 kilometers northeast of Kochi. More than 2,000 people were attending the 3-day event. 2 women who'd been attending the meeting died on Sunday, while a 12-year-old girl with 95% burns succumbed to her injuries on Monday morning. Senior police official Sheikh Darvesh Saheb said a preliminary investigation indicated that an improvised explosive device placed inside a tiffin box might have caused the explosions. Etihad Airways, the national airline of the United Arab Emirates, made the country's first ever flight from St. Petersburg to Abu Dhabi on Sunday. Footage shows Etihad Airways representatives and the chairperson of St. Petersburg's Tourism Development Committee, Sergei Konayev, cutting the ribbon, as well as passengers checking in. According to Asiat Kalvashi, Director of Aviation Commerce at St. Petersburg's Pulkovo Airport, flights to the UAE were in high demand. She says for Pulkovo Airport specifically, this flight is very important. We are working on increasing the number of flights between the United Arab Emirates and St. Petersburg. We see the demand for the destination increasing substantially. We have an outbound flow to the Arab Emirates increasing. Plus, we expect the increase of an inbound flow from Arab Emirates. One of the passengers, Alina, said that the move has made traveling to the country very convenient. Etihad Airways Boeing 787 Dreamliner flights will operate from St. Petersburg to Abu Dhabi and back 3 times a week. Imagine the excitement of first-time travelers there. Moving on to some other stories, a violinist is using music and art to explore the painful legacy of how laborers at wineries in the Western Cape province of South Africa were given the wine as part of their payment for centuries, a practice known as the DOP system. Now, the system, which began at the time of slavery in the 17th century and persisted until the recent past despite attempts to abolish it, caused high rates of alcoholism among mixed-race workers who, for historical reasons, were the main labor force at the wineries.
Violinist Lane Rudolph, who goes by the stage name Daphne, wanted to expose how the DOP system, a practice of paying laborers with wine rather than cash, introduced by Dutch colonialists and maintained under apartheid, had damaged the mixed-race community's culture and entrenched harmful stereotypes.
When you think of a colored and what I've seen on social media, TikTok, all of these things, I see that to be colored means to be violent and it means to be drunk.
The term colored, considered racist in some cultures, can be used in a neutral way in South Africa to talk about people who are of mixed race. Rudolph created and performed in a show called Dop is My Taal, which means alcohol is my language in Afrikaans, at an arts venue in Johannesburg. The show involved Daphne playing music she had composed, interspersed with excerpts from the South African national anthem, while another musician performed using beer bottles, domino pieces and thimbles, objects associated with the daily lives of farm laborers.
So the only memories that we have, or only stories, cultural stories that we have are, oh yes, you know, your great-grandfather was maybe Scottish or Irish or Spanish. And growing up, for me, my experience of being colored was that we never spoke about our black ancestors. So it was always just that you acknowledged, yes, you're quarter Spanish, you're quarter this and that, but there's a very euphoric claim to being maybe 5% European. So how do we even start to break down our identity and see ourselves as Kham people, as new speakers, when we are denying ourselves the right as, you know, the First Nation?
An audience member says the DOP system created a cycle of dependency, subjugation, poverty, abuse, and high rates of fatal alcohol syndrome, whose impact was still affecting communities today.
For me, it really registered in so many ways because we struggle to fit in. It's always like it's either you over or you under, so you always have to fit in some way. So I love the fact that she's taking upon herself to do a work that speaks for so many other voices which won't speak because it's either you black or you white.
Other audience members at the performance of Dop is My Taal feel satisfied that the work has articulated uncomfortable truth and given expression to a part of South African society that sometimes feels marginalized.
Riyadh in Saudi Arabia could be a melting pot of the old and new, as seen in the traditional marketplace known as the Souk Al-Zal. Our foreign affairs correspondent Amrachi Bani does a lot more explaining in this next report.
Walking into the Souk Al-Zal, one's expectation is to see stalls and stalls of traditional goods on sale and expect the sales representatives to call out for clientele. But it is different here. The first set of goods are antiques, things you may or may not have seen growing up, depending on your present age. It's like a blast from the past, but I assure you, it's all carefully curated in case you wish to purchase. The market covers an area of almost 9.5 acres and dates far back as the year 1901. It is found in the Ad Diriyah neighborhood and is the oldest and biggest antique market in Riyadh. You can find almost any souvenir here at the Souk Al-Zal, from cheap treasure to special antique, from traditional clothing to sweet-smelling incense for the home. But you will need to come prepared, as in money-wise, as I found out when we decided to stop over at the Gold Souk. And how about those unique Arabian perfumes?
Is this a female perfume?
Here, there is no distinction of eau de toilette, eau de parfum, or parfum, just a scent from the Arabia. This is a representation of the original Saudi Arabia, alongside the modern high-rise buildings, malls and road networks, and a Saudi Arabia appreciated by those who never forget how the country got here. Amarachi Ubani, Channel Television News.
Well, take me with you next time, Amarachi. Well, that's it on the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jacka Rogers. Bye for now.